Yes, America! Hello, everybody! I am the Talk Radio Protege, and this is the Protege program. Friday is almost here. We're chugging right along, and the news cycle does not slow down. Immigration is still the topic buzzing around. And yesterday at the White House press briefing, there was some very contentious exchanges between Stephen Miller, who did most of the briefing, and some of the other reporters who were there. Just wait till you hear some of the whoppers that Jim Acosta threw out. And Miller handled everything very well, in my humble opinion. There were a lot of interruptions that went on, so the briefing clips that you'll see will be pretty heavily edited. So I encourage you, go watch the full exchange yourself. I did my best to subtitle some of these clips where the talking over each other gets pretty intense, but please go watch the full thing for yourself so that you can get all of the context that goes on. Cut 1, we're going to look at Miller talking about some of the points-based proposals for the green card system. Remember yesterday I expressed some concern over the wage depressions that are currently in the low skill areas being translated into higher skill areas, and as it turns out, Miller addresses that in this bite. So here we go.
So we're proposing to limit family-based migration to spouses and minor children. Additionally, we're establishing a new entry system that's points-based. Australia has a points-based system, Canada has a points-based system, and what will this system look at? It will look at, does the applicant speak English? Can they support themselves and their families financially? Do they have a skill that will add to the U.S. economy? Are they being paid a high wage? The last part is very important because it will help prevent displacement of U.S. workers. So if a company, let's say, they're offering 3 times the median wage, that person will get more points on their application than if they're being offered 2 times the median wage or 1 times the median wage. So all of a sudden, you're putting upward pressure on wages instead of downward pressure, and you're making it very hard to use immigrant labor to substitute for American workers, because by prioritizing higher paid workers, you basically end the practice, more or less, of being able to seek out permanent residents to come in at lower pay.
So there you go. That's how you control for the immigrant wage gap. Prioritizing for immigrant employees who will be paid above the median wage means that employers will not be getting the employees that they value the least. They'll be getting the ones that they value the most, as opposed to the dime a dozen cookie cutter employees that are being imported for the express sake of cutting cost. Now, that's the only line that I really wanted to pull out of Miller's opening remarks. I think I addressed sufficiently the other points that he brought out in yesterday's video. Go watch that if you want some more analysis of the actual proposals. Now let's get into the Q&A portion. The first exchange that I want to examine is from, I believe it's the first person that Miller took questions from. This is Glenn Thrush of the New York Grimes, and Miller are talking about immigration and employment statistics. The whole exchange is about 3.5 minutes long, so of course I cut some parts out, cut out questions. I'll be reading the questions off of my script. Go watch the video for yourself, make sure that I got these right. So Thrush asked 2 questions, and Miller dismissed the second question because it was based on a false statement. It's going to be the one that I address first because it's pretty quick and painless. The premise was that infrastructure is less important than immigration, which no one from the administration has said. It's not what Miller said in this interview, but here was the question that Thrush asked. I have sources that told me about a month ago that you guys have sort of elbowed infrastructure out of the way to get immigration on the legislative queue. Tell me why this is more important than infrastructure. Gladly, Glenn, I will gladly answer your question. It's more important to correct the immigration problems before implementing an infrastructure package because construction is one of the industries hit hardest by the flood of low-skilled workers. Construction is one of the industries that can most easily drive wages down by importing these workers that are going to work for depressed wages. You don't need a statistical study to understand this, but if you want one, there'll be one that we talk about a little bit in this video, one that we'll cite as well, and one that Miller references later in his answer. It's by a man named George Borjas. But logically speaking, what do low-skill workers do for work? They do the menial, repetitious, usually physically demanding jobs. And what are some of the most physically demanding jobs on the market? Construction's got to be number one, or up there in the top three. What would an infrastructure package appropriate funds for? Infrastructure construction. We don't want the contractors who go for infrastructure jobs to be able to undercut American workers by taking advantage of incoming or foreign workers who will work for much lower wages once they get here. Now, the first question that Thrush asked was addressed at length by Miller, and the question is worded as follows. First of all, let's have some statistics. There have been a lot of studies out there that don't show a correlation between low-skilled immigration and the loss of jobs for native workers. Cite for me, if you could, one or two studies with specific numbers that prove the correlation between those two things, because your entire policy is based on that. Now, the wording that Thrush chose for this question is critical, because he's going to move the goalposts later on in this exchange. So have a listen to Miller's response here.
I think the most recent study I would point to is the study from George Borjas that he just did about the Mariel boat lift. And he went back and re-examined and opened up the old data and talked about how it actually did reduce wages for workers who were living there at the time. And Borjas has, of course, done enormous amounts of research on this, as has the Peter Kirsanow on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, as has Steve Camarada at the Center for Immigration Studies, and so on and so on. And the recent study said that as much as $300 billion a year may be lost as a result of our current immigration system in terms of folks drawing more public benefits than they're paying in.
I'm going to come in right here and comment on the George Borjas study just quickly. From the abstract of the study, a reappraisal of the Mariel evidence, specifically examining the evolution of wages in the low-skill group most likely to be affected, quickly overturns the finding that Mariel did not affect the Miami's wage structure. The drop in the relative wage of the least educated Miamians was substantial, 10 to 30%, implying an elasticity of wages within respect to the number of workers between negative 0.5 and negative 1.5. Now, I'm not a statistician, so I'm not exactly sure what those negative numbers mean, but I do know what 10 to 30% is, and that's a negative number. Those are decreases in wages for local Miami area residents, Miami, Florida. This is talking about the Marielitos boat lift that brought a whole bunch of Cuban immigrants over from Cuba, and I believe it was right before the missile crisis. So this fits the requirement for Thrush's question. Remember, Thrush asked for one or two studies. So with this study alone, which did study the relationship between importing low-skill workers and the loss of jobs or the depression of wages for local workers, and it provides specific numbers, 10 to 30%. But that wasn't good enough for Thrush. In the exchange that we just listened to, you heard him interrupt Miller to ask about a specific organization. In his original question, he did not ask for studies from that specific organization, but he wanted to after Miller had started speaking. Miller had an immediate answer. This was very good, very well handled by Miller. And now at this point, Miller has answered the question in totality. He's gone above and beyond by offering 4 citations at least when Thrush asked for 1 or 2. And how did Mr. Thrush thank Miller for this above and beyond answer?
I asked you for a statistic.
No, you didn't! You did not ask for statistics. You asked for a citation. When you ask for a citation, you want to know where you can go look up the statistics. This is just another snake in the grass reporter trying to move the goalposts in order to maintain some kind of offensive advantage. Miller slam dunked this question, so Thrush had to take his hoop and go home. There is a little more back and forth, but really by the end, Miller just mops up Thrush and moves on. Now, as it turns out, there were several more questions taken by Miller until we really get to the fun part of this press briefing. Miller versus Jim Acosta of the fake news network. So here was the first question that Jimmy Boy asked Miller. What you are proposing, or what the president is proposing here, does not sound like it's in keeping with American tradition when it comes to immigration. The Statue of Liberty says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." It doesn't say anything about speaking English or being able to be a computer programmer. Aren't you trying to change what it means to be an immigrant coming into this country if you're telling them you have to speak English? Can't people learn how to speak English when they get here? And I'm itching to just dig into this question, just tear right into it. I'm going to offer this. Of course, this poem that's at the Statue of Liberty, not on it, doesn't say anything about being a computer programmer because it's from the 19th century. Okay? Moving on. Miller just knocks this out of the park, so I'm going to let him take it away from here. Please note, this clip that you're going to see is pretty heavily edited because there's a lot of crosstalk, there was a lot of interruptions, and I wanted you to get to hear Miller's answer somewhat compressed and in one big load. So here we go.
Well, first of all, right now, it's a requirement that to be naturalized, you have to speak English. So the notion that speaking English wouldn't be a part of our immigration systems would be actually very ahistorical. Secondly, I don't want to get off into a whole thing about history here, but the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of liberty enlightening the world. It's a symbol of American liberty lighting the world. The poem that you're referring to that was added later is not actually part of the original Statue of Liberty. Jim, let's talk about this. In 1970, when we let in 300,000 people a year, was that violating or not violating the Statue of Liberty law of the land? In the 1990s, when it was 500,000 a year, was it violating or not violating the Statue of Liberty law of the land?
Look at that face! Jim has no idea what's going on! He's totally clueless! By contrast, look at Miller's face. He's in total control of this conversation. I'm sorry, I had to pop in here. I had to point that out. Carry on, carry on.
Tell me what years meet Jim Acosta's definition of the Statue of Liberty poem, Law of the Land. So you're saying 1 million a year is the Statue of Liberty number. 900,000 violates it, 800,000 violates it.
It's home run after slam dunk after touchdown for this whole segment. Now, as I said earlier, I cut out the interruptions and back and forth because it really didn't influence the direction of the conversation. But it would be a crime against reporting if I didn't show you this faux pas committed by Mr. Jim Acosta. Listen to this.
Yeah, let me ask you a question.
That sounds like some National Park revisionism.
What in the actual flying flapjack is National Park revisionism? Wait a minute. I've got it. I know what was going through Acosta's mind as he's saying this. Here we go. He's thinking, I want to call this guy a history revisionist, but he's actually right. So instead, I can insinuate that he thinks the poem is not there. I can call him a National Park revisionist. Jim, if you want to say that the man is wrong about the Statue of Liberty, just say the words, "You're wrong." You don't have to make up a fake phrase on the fly that makes you sound like a complete moron. Oh my word. And on the subject of being a moron, this whole exchange makes it look like Jim does not understand the difference between a statue and a statute. That's why Miller keeps saying the Statue of Liberty law. He's mocking Jim's total ignorance of the statue and what it symbolizes. He's just mocking relentlessly the fact that Jim has totally conflated statues and statutes. And it all flies miles over Jim's head. It's hilarious. Now, let's get into this next segment. It's pretty long. I'm going to be bopping in and out to make comments as we go. So let's get right into it.
Your statement's also shockingly ahistorical in another respect, too, which is if you look at the history of immigration, It's actually ebbed and flowed. We've had periods of very large waves, followed by periods of less immigration and more immigration. And during the, we've had
a period of immigration right
I'm sorry, what was that about low immigration? I don't think I heard you right.
now. The president wants to build
it's
a wall.
actually,
You want
it's
to
actually
bring about a sweeping change to
surely,
immigration.
Jim, you don't actually think that a wall affects green card policy. You couldn't possibly believe that, do you? Actually, the notion that you actually think immigration is at a historic lull, the foreign-born population in the United States today, Jim,
Staff on Monday talking about how border crossings.
do you really, I want to be serious, Jim, do you really at CNN not know the difference between green card policy and illegal immigration?
Sir,
you really don't know that?
Cuban immigrant. He came to this country in 1962, right before the Cuban Missile Crisis.
What? What? What does your father coming here from Cuba right before the missile crisis have to do with border crossings and the wall? Do you even train of thought, Jim? I almost feel bad making my audience watch this segment. Oh my goodness. It's like chasing a rabbit that doesn't know where its den went. You have no idea where this conversation is at any given moment. Here. You want me to draw you a map? Let me walk you through this by the hand so you don't get lost. Miller says, your statement doesn't hold water compared to historical immigration policy. And your point is, immigration is low. But the foreign-born population is at an all-time high. And you respond, but border crossings! That has nothing to do with green cards. But your dad got a green card. What? Do you see how this conversation is going all over the place and nowhere at the same time, Jim? But this isn't even the best part. It's the next exchange that has the media falling all over themselves to try and disparage Miller. Have a listen and see if you can spot the racism.
Yes, people who immigrate
Okay,
to this country
Jim,
can eventually. People who
So Jim,
immigrate
as a
to this
factual
country
question,
through,
Jim.
not through Ellis
Jim,
Island
as a
and their
factual,
family
Jim,
members,
as a factual
but in
question.
other ways, do obtain a green card at some point. They do it through a lot of hard work, and yes, they may learn English as a second language later on in life.
So, but
this
Jim,
this whole notion of, well, they could learn, they have to learn English before they get to the United States. Are we just going to bring in people from Great Britain and Australia?
Gee, I wonder if there are any countries besides Great Britain and Australia where they don't speak English. They wouldn't happen to do just that in these countries where it's an official language, would they? Oh dear, just look at all those African countries on this map. Wow, looks like you stepped right off into it, doesn't it, Jim?
Jim, it's actually, I have to honestly say, I am shocked at your statement that you think that only people from Great Britain and Australia would know English. It's actually, it reveals your cosmopolitan bias to a shocking degree that in your mind, no, this is an amazing moment. This is an amazing moment. That you think only people from Great Britain or Australia would speak English is so insulting to millions of hardworking immigrants who do speak English from all over the world. Jim, have you honestly never met an immigrant from another country who speaks English outside of Great Britain and Australia? Is that your personal experience?
Of course, there are people who come.
But that's not what you said, and it shows your cosmopolitan bias. And I just want to say,
Sounds like you're trying to engineer the racial and ethnic flow of people into this.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, Jim, but you are literally the only person in this conversation talking about race and ethnicity. Before you brought up your dad, no one was talking about race. Before you accused the world at large, save for Britain and Australia, of being unable to learn and speak English, no one was talking about race! Miller, go!
Jim, that is one of the most outrageous, insulting, ignorant, and foolish things you've ever said, and for you that's still a really... The notion that you think that this is a racist bill is so wrong and so insulting. Jim, the reality is that the foreign-born population into our country has quadrupled since 1970. That's a fact. It's been mostly driven by green card policy. Now, this bill allows for immediate nuclear family members to come into the country, much as they would today, and then it adds an additional points-based system. The people who've been hurt the most, the people who've been hurt the most.
Here you go, Jim. I found the English-speaking component for you. Have you never used Google before? Do you have a smartphone on your person right now? You know, there's a lot of smartphones that will just do the search for you if you tell them to.
By the policy you're advocating, are apparently just unfettered, uncontrolled migration. The people who've been hurt the most by the policy. The people who've been hurt the most by the policy that you're. The people who've been hurt the most by the policy you're advocating are immigrant workers and minority workers and African American workers and Hispanic workers.
And that was the end of Mr. Acosta, but there was someone who wasn't paying very much attention. Go.
Hispanic workers.
And it has African American community. Now you brought it up again. You said you wanted to have a conversation and not target.
Well, considering that the targeting that's being talked about is positive in nature, I don't see why you should have a problem with it, unless you've been asleep this whole time. No. Here it is. I got it. It's like her programming doesn't compute anything except for the phrase African American. I mean, come on, woman. Why are you even here? If you're just going to be sleeping in the back until someone says African American so you can jump up and go, targeting! 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 You're targeting! Oh, come on. And if this wasn't bad enough, the torrent of bourgeois, out-of-touch tweets from verified lefty quote-unquote journalists was just as asinine and mind-numbingly stupid as Acosta's conversation mapping. Jamil Smith says, credit to Acosta for keeping it together. Jamil, I don't know what briefing you were watching, but Acosta was a lost puppy in that room. He had no idea what was going on. Andrea Mitchell, Trump aide, hashtag Steven, for some reason he gets a hashtag, Miller, lecturing Cuban-American Jim Acosta of CNN on green card policy, which his family lived firsthand. Andrea, Jim didn't go through green card policy. His dad did. And it looks like Jimmy Boy didn't learn anything from it. Hashtag rude. How old are you? 12? Christina Wilkie, believe it or not, despite all of Jim's evidence to the contrary, it is possible for a person with above average upbringing to be in touch with reality and not be stupidly racist at the same time. This reveals your amazing cosmopolitan bias. Did you hear Jim Acosta say the only people in the world outside of the U.S. that can speak English live in Great Britain and Australia? Where were you? What were you watching? And look who it is. Apparently, April African American, Mrs. My Trigger Phrase Ryan, woke up long enough to make a tweet unrelated to African Americans. What just happened? We hit a new low today. Lord have mercy. She still managed to slide on into the race-based stereotype. Goodness gracious. All in all, I have to say that Stephen Miller performed exceptionally well today, and I hope he makes more appearances at press briefings in the future. He was incredibly well informed, he was perfectly eloquent, and he managed to maintain some control over a pretty hostile crowd. Saturday Night Live is going to have to pretty much stretch to find a way to make fun of this guy, but don't worry. I'm sure they will find a way, even if it means totally lying about the process that went on. SNL finds a way. Kind of like life in that Jurassic Park movie. That's going to wrap up this one, ladies and gents. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and sign up for alerts. You can also make a financial contribution if you like through my Patreon or PayPal accounts. All sources are linked in the description below, and as always, good night and God bless.